All right. Thank you. I certainly appreciate the invitation to come here and talk about this topic that I do think is very important. And my wife appreciates the opportunity to come and visit our granddaughter Samantha, who is actually at home just outside of town, working on potty training with my wife and my daughter. So that's the big news from the Richlock family this week. Being on campus is really a big deal. You think about what we deal with our students on campuses. We already know we've got nutrition issues. We know they drink too much. We're worried about cigarettes and drugs, unsafe sex, all that kind of stuff. Very few campuses talk about gambling. Gambling is a current issue. It's a rising issue, and it's been around a long time too. This is a quote I find fascinating from a book that was originally published in, I think, 1870. It said that the god of fortune, once sporting near the shady pool of Olympus, was met by the gay and captivating god of war, who soon allured her into his arms. They were united, but the matrimony was not holy, and the result of the union was a misfigured child named Gaming. From the moment of her birth, this wayward thing could only be pleased by cards, dice, or counters. She was not without her fascinations, and many were her admirers. As she grew up, she was courted by all the gay and extravagant of both sexes, for she was of neither sex and yet combining the attractions of each. At length, however, being mostly beset by men of the sword, she formed an unnatural union with one of them and gave birth to twins, one called Dueling, the other a grim and hideous monster called Suicide. These became their mother's darlings, nursed by her with constant care and tenderness, and her perpetual companions. So it's a dangerous thing, and we know it, and we play. It's fun too. I'm not a prohibitionist, frankly, when it comes to gambling, but I'm worried about what's happening. It's already said we have an epidemic on college campuses already, and sports betting is just coming to the center. Problem gambling on campus is at about twice the average of the overall population, roughly 6% as opposed to 3%. Because, and we'll look at some stuff, we're going to see statistics. Men at college age are kind of the prime risk situation. Despite this, you'll see in the bottom half here, only about 22% of college campuses have any kind of policies on gambling. And this is something that as faculty senates, you can take back to your campuses and try to develop something, create something that happens. Why? Well, boom, right here, problem gambler commits suicide almost every day, much higher risk for depression, suicide attempts approaching 20%. These are serious things because it involves so many things. There's the psychology of losing. There's financial issues. You don't have that much money in college probably anyway. Why did I get here? How did I get here? Why is a law professor doing this? Just a bit of background about me. Back in the 1980s, I worked for a law firm in Chicago, Jenner and Block, one of the big firms. We represented Bally's, the pinball people. Bally's got a contract to make the thing on top there, a lottery machine that they'd put in bars and restaurants and stuff like that. They realized that their competition would be from things on the bottom there, which are officially for amusement only, but in fact, people from behind the bar would pay off. These are called gray area gambling devices. And they actually used to be run by organized crime. Now I think some businesses may run them, but frankly, they're designed for gambling, but they don't automatically jump out as gambling. You got to understand that it's a gambling device. So Bally's wanted some legislation that would make those things on the bottom illegal, but would not touch Pac-Man, right? Because that's the bread and butter. There are games that are just for fun, for amusement. They're games for gambling. They want to get rid of the gambling ones because there's going to be competition for lottery machine, but not touch Pac-Man. That was my job in Chicago at the law firm. I spent a long time researching, understanding, doing this stuff, writing some legislation that died in committee. But when I came to law school faculty, joined academia, and it's publish or perish, I think, well, geez, I know something about this nobody else knows about, right? Let's all write about that. So I started working on gambling law, got some good publications out of it. Became a co-author on the first textbook on gambling law. There are now, I think, 3 or 4. I'm actually going next week. I'm traveling again next week. One of my students from a gaming law course I developed before there was a textbook, I started teaching it, just was invited out to make a presentation in California of a paper she wrote for my class. They're paying her expenses out there. They're not paying mine. I gotta go, right? So we're gonna go out there. And of course, so I'm going, my wife is going. So, don't have a granddaughter out there, but you know going. Anyway, gambling has been a fascinating area to study. I, by the way, am both a professor and a lawyer. And somebody on your board gave me an hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to use it. So start drawing up articles of impeachment of whoever set the schedule, because that's because I'm going to teach you a little bit of something about this, because to understand where we are and what we're dealing with, I think it's important that we understand the background, the history, the law, the literature. There's so much stuff in gambling that you probably haven't thought about. Here's the easy part. This is from a legal standpoint, this is what we call the elements of gambling. What makes something gambling? Consideration or the bet. What are you putting up? What's at risk? Got to be something at risk. If there's no risk, then we got a sweepstakes, and it's not gambling. That's why we can have sweepstakes. The outcome, we always say chance. States vary on this. Some states say any uncertain outcome. Others say if it's skill, it's not gambling, which is why we have poker on ESPN nowadays, because some states say poker is a game of skill, therefore it's not gambling. And then reward. It's got to be the pot, the jackpot, the whatever you win. We got all 3 of these things. It's clearly gambling, which may or may not be legal depending upon the scenario. But this is the background elements of gambling if you're studying the law, for instance. And we can go back in every society known to mankind and find ancient elements of gambling. The Mahabharata thing there on the right-hand side is an ancient poem from India from 300 BC that talks about these 2 warring families. And in essence, there's one who the prince is so consumed by gambling, he bets away first his fortune, then his kingdom, then his brothers into slavery, then himself, then his wife. And then the family escapes. And then they come back and wage a war and everybody gets killed, basically because of gambling. There are also, in 200 BC, we have records from India of a governmental agency that took taxes on gambling. I mean, governments see that that's a money pot, right? But other things, well, I thought it was kind of interesting. There were excavations in Rome not that long ago where they found, in London, but it was when London had been occupied by the Romans, and they found Roman dice going back to the time when the Romans occupied. But it wasn't just that they found dice; they found loaded dice. They actually excavated loaded dice in London from the Roman occupation. So gambling is universal; it goes back everywhere. Every society does it, has it, whatever. In fact, there's Robin Hood here because there really was. The Robin Hood story takes place when Richard Lionhearted is away on a crusade, and everything takes place back in Sherwood and stuff. But King Richard actually, on one of the crusades, left instructions to his men saying, put down the cards, put down the dice, pick up your arrows, your foot races, your horse races. If you're gonna bet on those things. So when I talked about there's a division between chance and skill, we can trace that back at least to this time. The dice and the cards were signs of idleness, and they were frowned upon. But if you can develop your skills of war, that was more acceptable. When the United States early days were founded, we were actually supported very much by lotteries. Originally, the Virginia Company of London conducted lotteries in England, proceeds of which went to support the folks over here in Virginia. And there were other ones like that. At some point along the way, the people in England got tired of sending the proceeds over here. And then we went to domestic lotteries. But before we had an opportunity to have taxes, lotteries was a way that you could make money because you needed to build roads and fortifications. And you can see by the mid 1700s, everybody except North Carolina and Maryland regulated lotteries. It's a way. I gave a talk recently in Florida, and I did some research and found even Florida had some lotteries back at that time. The federal lotteries, there's actually a letter from George Washington telling his men to quit playing cards and go sell your lottery tickets because they were making, raising money to support the Revolutionary War. Lottery tickets became a form of currency. And you can see from the thing there, a couple things happened. They were counterfeited. And some states you get the death penalty for counterfeiting them. And different colonies had exchanges. So you had a Maryland lottery ticket, because these lotteries, by the way, weren't the way we know them today. These lotteries, that you buy the ticket and it may remain in play for a year or two. It would be more like a drawdown, we might think about it. Tickets might get eliminated, but the ticket would, so it had value until it's completely eliminated. So we didn't have really national money, but the lottery tickets had value. We'd get ticket brokers. So you got a Maryland lottery ticket, but you're coming to Virginia, you could exchange your tickets for currency. And some of those ticket brokers have developed into financial institutions, big banks that we still know today. And I used to have some on the top of my head, but some like Chase Manhattan, some of the big banks actually trace their roots back to being ticket brokers back at the time. If you read Ben Franklin's, when I left the practice of law and became an academic, I decided I was going to read books that I always wanted to read. One of them I wanted to read was Ben Franklin's autobiography. And in his autobiography, he talks about a lottery they had in Pennsylvania. And he said they were worried about Quaker opposition, not to the lottery itself, but they were buying a tank to fortify Philadelphia. And excuse me, a cannon, not a tank, a cannon. And he said, so we decided we would just tell them it was a fire engine. And when we got it, indeed, it was a fire engine. So it was sort of a play on words he did, but he deceived the Quakers of having all these institutions, all these universities were founded and established, and at least in their early years, supported, at least in part, by lotteries. I mean, this was the way governments raised money, the way schools got built. This lottery system existed until about 1820. In 1820, two important things happened. Number one, there was a major expose, a newspaper expose of a lottery that had been established like 10 years earlier to build this bridge that had brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars, and almost nothing had been spent or accomplished towards the bridge. It was a scam, so it got exposed. Then there was this booklet that was written, The Wonderful Advantages of Adventuring in the Lottery, which was a morality play about, a father, a husband, a guy who'd never done anything wrong. He started playing the lottery, he gets sucked in, he becomes a degenerate gambler, he loses everything. And it's the collapse of his life. It sold for a penny. It was very, very popular. And the attitude of America changed against lotteries. So by 1830, it was interesting and I'm going to my law a little bit, because if you think about it, if we're not going to have lotteries, there's sort of a few different levels you can do. First of all, you can say we're just not going to authorize any lotteries, most basically. Second thing, you say, well, we'll make it against the law to have a lottery. That would seem a logical thing. But in fact, we went to where virtually every state put in their constitution, we'll never have a lottery. The last 40 years, as a lot of states have gone more and more to lotteries, virtually every state, I think all but 4 today, have a lottery. They had to go back and amend constitutions. But the people back then were so upset about lotteries that they actually put it into constitutions. The one slat revival after the 1830s was after the Civil War in the South. After the Civil War, most of the South was economically devastated. Many states, including Mississippi, briefly had a lottery. Mississippi's lottery got overturned with a new constitution they drafted, and that was litigated up to the Supreme Court, and the courts of the new constitution trumped the grant of the lottery charter. But Louisiana had a notorious lottery where tickets were sold around America. There was a time when more than half of the mail in and out of New Orleans was lottery related. And everybody in America is playing the Louisiana lottery. The money's coming into Louisiana. The people running it are building parks that are doing stuff to keep everybody in New Orleans and Louisiana happy, so they keep authorizing it. The people everywhere else in America who are opposed to gambling feel we're getting the bad consequences of gambling, but not the benefits. So eventually there was federal legislation to stop lottery related materials in the US mail. And that made a dent, but only a dent because they went to the 1901 version of FedEx and had private carriers. And then Congress acted further and banned lottery materials from interstate commerce. And when that stopped, that effectively shut down the Louisiana lottery. Once they were not selling outside of the state, it was no longer profitable in the state. But there are books written about it. It's a pretty fascinating little chapter in American history. Now we go into an era of sort of where we think of organized crime. So everybody thinks of organized crime with prohibition of alcohol. Most of the groups that rose to prominence under alcohol prohibition, in fact, were in existence running illegal gambling operations prior to that. So you got some of the famous ones, Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, Dutch Schultz. Stephanie St. Clair ran a numbers game in Harlem, very high profile, not as well known today, perhaps, although there's a episode on the History Channel. There's a show on the History Channel that profiles her that's very interesting. This is one of my favorite movies too. I just threw it in there, but to kind of give you an idea of that time, kind of the sports betting stuff. And if you haven't seen it, that's well worth seeing that movie. So we got pretty much no gambling. Then in 1931, think about it. We got the Great Depression. We're having all kinds of problems. Out west, we're trying to build the Hoover Dam, and Nevada authorizes some gambling situations. So 1931, they do that. Often overlooked, though, that's the same year that Florida legalized pari-mutuel. In other words, dog and horse tracks and highline. Also, Florida briefly experimented with one-arm slot machines. They pulled them out after about 2 years, but they were also they'd had the depression, of course, but there'd been a couple hurricanes that devastated their tourism, and so they turned to gambling for that purpose. By the way, the dog tracks and the horse tracks and highlight lasted. Technically, I guess horse and highlight still last. Dogs are gone now, but they've stayed pretty much through the rest of until just recently. And that's where the law was fairly standard until 1961. 1961, Bobby Kennedy is the Attorney General, and he works with his staff. They developed the so-called Wire Act. Here's the thing. Nevada had legal gambling, including on sports. Can you call and place a bet on the phone to a Nevada a casino? The Wire Act said no. You can't use telephone wires across state lines for the purpose of gambling. So it shut that down. That's important for kind of what happens later on with the Wire Act, how it affected. A couple years after that, 64, New Hampshire citizens are tired of their taxes being raised. They're looking for some way to fund stuff some other way. They push for the first of the modern lotteries. The idea was it would compete with illegal games, it would raise money. It also starts a chain reaction because once your next door neighbor has a lottery, it's really hard to resist it. There are currently 4 states that don't have lotteries. Do you think you can name them?
Hawaii.
Hawaii is one. And why? Okay, well, why Hawaii? You got no neighbors.
Yeah.
Alabama, Bible Belt.
Yeah.
What are the other 2?
Mississippi.
No, Mississippi's got one. We got one. We got one fairly recently. Tennessee got one fairly recently.
Texas.
Texas got one.
Alaska.
You were saying
Alaska. Yeah, Alaska does not have
Does
one.
not have
Again, not really a neighbor, you know.
Mhm.
And then the other one is Utah. Mormon.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes.
So, yeah, so I mean, you know. So those are the 4. There are only 2 states that have no form of legal gambling, and that's Hawaii and Utah. There are other forms of gambling in Alabama and Alaska. But anyway, this kicks off the development of lotteries across the state. Also, the worst television ever. Do you guys ever remember these shows on Saturday because it has to be pure chance. It has to be pure chance.
Except
And
in
they try to-
Pennsylvania.
Huh?
Except in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania kicked off the worst movie.
Yeah.
Oh. If you haven't seen this movie, this is in Travolta's, I guess I used to say his down years. Now it's the first of his first down period of his career. But yeah, it's before Pulp Fiction.
I
after
did not
that,
know they made a movie out of the
This is
incident in
it. This
Pennsylvania.
is Pennsylvania.
I
Yeah.
had no idea they even made a movie about it.
Yeah. So the news the guy who at the microphone said beef and the woman who pulled the ping pong balls figured out how to weigh them down in such a way so that they could rig the outcome. Do you know?
So I teach statistics and back in late 90s, and that was actually in statistics books back
Is that
then.
right?
Mhm.
Well, do you know who the first person to notice this was? Who reported this first?
No, I don't know that.
There was an illegal numbers operator. Numbers is an illegal lottery. Who noticed that numbers were skewed, things were coming up wrong. They would use the lottery numbers. And the guy says, this is coming up skewed. He goes in and reports it. And at first they didn't recognize it, but
That's why it's in the stats books, because it doesn't follow a
Yeah.
uniform distribution as it should, because each number should have an equal likelihood of showing up.
they
And certain
injected a
numbers
little,
did not.
I think a little white paint they injected, and made some
Mhm.
ping pong balls lighter, heavier. So, yeah.
Yeah, but that was in the 80s then?
I would have said 80s. I don't
Yeah.
remember exactly. I remember. I have seen the movie. I mean, it's not a great movie, but but you know what? It absolutely makes it worth. It makes worth everything that you said that, and I had that slide.
I'm getting a little under the table here, yeah. You paid me to do that, but yes. It was the right time frame. I knew we were working down that chronological order.
Well, so the other thing that starts happening in the 1980s is the development of Indian casinos. Today there are Indian casinos, and that's the term, Indian casinos. In 29 states, there are 510 different gaming properties, 242 federally recognized tribes. It began really in this 1981 case, Seminole Tribe versus, so it's out of Florida, which in essence, a tribe is a sovereign dependent nation of the state. So it means the tribe has a lot of discretion, but not entire. And the way it works with gambling is if the state authorizes, for instance, charity bingo, we're going to allow bingo, but you can only do it once a night. And going to do between these hours, you're going to these locations or whatever. It's legal, but it's regulated. The tribe has to follow the laws. The tribe does not have to follow regulations. So the tribe could have bingo 24/7 as long as it's legal. And so we began seeing a flood of bingo facilities all over the place. It's sort of funny when I just talked to the chief of the Choctaw tribe in Mississippi. I knew his predecessor, Chief Philip Martin, when Mississippi went to riverboat gambling, they had a bingo hall. When we had riverboat gambling, our casino gambling had to be on the water. They could have casino gambling now, it just didn't have to be on the water. So the original development was devoting an enormous amount of space in their casino to bingo. Anybody laughing yet? Okay, so because it took about 2 weeks for them to realize nobody wanted to play bingo at a casino. It was within 3 months, all of the bingo stuff was moved out and slot machines were moved in. But you know, you're trying to figure out they were going to be the only casino able to offer bingo. The other casinos had regulations that excluded bingo. So anyway, you have the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act put in place that requires states to negotiate an agreement with the tribe, although requiring an agreement sometimes is tough, and there's litigation that came out of that as well. 1980s also, we see the rise in riverboat gambling. This is what I think a lot of people certainly in Mississippi and stuff pictured, sort of the old riverboat kind of look thing up and down the Mississippi. You figure that's what it's, you know, that's historic stuff like that. The one on top there is a Mississippi riverboat. It's somebody described it once as, you know, you put the Sears Tower on barges. Actually, see, hotels and theaters do not have to be over the water. Only the gambling floor has to be over the water. And so you probably, that problem is probably actually on ground right there. Yeah.
Biloxi.
Yeah. This is the Beau Rivage is our biggest, nicest one. Really one that survived Katrina. Most of them got wiped out by Katrina, but it was big enough it survives. Pari-mutuel betting, which I talked about being available in Florida. Pari-mutuel betting is interesting because it's if you don't know much about sports, so most of us wouldn't know about what greyhound to bet on, right? It's a pool kind of thing, so the odds of payoff are dependent upon how much money goes in on a dog or a horse or a highlight player, and so it spreads back out. But the thing is, if you go to a dog track right across from Memphis, right across the river in Arkansas, there used to be Southland Greyhound Park. Remember one day my daughter Lindsay, who lives here, has got the baby, sitting in the back seat, and she sees Southland Greyhound Park. She said, "Daddy, what's that?" And I said, "Well, honey, that's where people race doggies." And she said, "I bet the doggies win."
Yeah.
But with a dog track or a horse track, something like that, you know, you place a bet, then there's a race, then there's a half an hour till the next one, roughly, right? So you're a gambler. That was there across from Memphis the entire time we developed. Tunica went from the poorest county in America in 1990, well, prior to 1990, to by 1995 being high real estate because the casinos developed there. Because people from Memphis drove down to the casinos in Tunica rather than going right across the river to the Greyhound track. Well, so Greyhound track, dog tracks, which and horse track, Greyhound and horse tracks, start losing money because people would rather gamble regularly, keep the money coming. So we developed racinos, where essentially you got a horse track or a dog track, and especially the dog tracks, you let people bet there. They basically put slot machines so that they can bet in between the races. One of the first things they actually did was they had remote, you could bet on remote races at other places, and they'd be streamed together, so you could kind of keep betting and feed that gambling feeling. So the racinos came along, and that still really wasn't very competitive. So we had this, you hear about bootleggers and Baptists coalition. Literally in Florida, Greyhound racing is gone now, and it's the animal rights people and the Racino people. Racino people, if long as we can keep our casino part we're losing money on the racetrack. The dogs are expensive. There's a lot of real estate. So the operators of the dog tracks joined with the animal rights people to stop the dog racing. And so, it's really leaving essentially horse racing as the only pari-mutuel type betting that's widely done in the United States today. There's still some places you can see highlight, I guess, but literally down to half a dozen in America. And although esports may say that esports, if it develops as a gambling thing, which it is throughout Asia, it's a pari-mutuel form of betting. I think this is sports betting, which is really what we're here to talk about today. And sports betting, from this cartoon, you can see sports betting is old, been with us a very long time. And the traditional approach, Tom Landry, when I was growing up, maybe the most respected man in America, coach of the Dallas Cowboys, or you see Commissioner Goodell from the NFL. I mean, the leagues were 100% against sports betting. It's going to corrupt everything. However, if we look back at history, in the 1800s, baseball, which was sort of the sport at the time, had a lot of corruption. There are a lot of stories of games being thrown and such. The American League, founded in 1910, was founded really to try to clean stuff up. It was originally going to have no alcohol, no games on Sunday, no gambling on that kind of stuff. The National League had all those things. They immediately.
Sorry, I was looking up highlights.
Highlight's pretty interesting.
It's a weird game. Like basketball lacrosse. All right. I just got, I can top that. No, I can happily top that. I was in Fort Myers airport, and I see one of the guys from Leonard Skinner, the band, and I don't know his name though, but like it would be cool if I knew his name to go say, hey, I really like the right. So I pick up my phone and band members from Leonard Skinner, and it started playing Sweet Home Alabama. Like that. I'm running away trying to turn it off. So that's all absolutely all right. But then we got I was getting ready to say, so the American League was supposed to come clean up, but it's kind of funny. In order to get a team in New York, and they weren't going to be a big league unless they got a team in New York. The first franchise, they're called the Hilltoppers, but it's the Yankees franchise, went to notorious gamblers. that basically Tammany Hall required that. So the American League didn't really do the cleanup. This is the 1919 Chicago White Sox, known forever as the Black Sox, because they threw the World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. They were prosecuted in Chicago and found not guilty by a jury that came up and got autographs immediately thereafter. And then all the records disappeared, but it was quite clear these guys acknowledged taking payments, getting paid off, stuff like that. So we've got an array of gambling concerns. Shoeless Joe Jackson would be in the Hall of Fame today, but he was on the Chicago Black Sox team. Some people say that his statistics are pretty good for the entire series. They are. His statistics in the game the White Sox lost are not good. And he acknowledged that he got $5,000 to throw. In fact, he said he was mad because he was supposed to get 20. Pete Rose, of course, has the most hits in Major League history, but he bet on baseball, and he's not in the Hall of Fame today because of that. Tim Donaghy was an NBA referee who spent time in federal penitentiary. He acknowledges only giving information to gamblers. I guess actually now he does admit that he also bet on some games, but he says it didn't affect his referee. It does, and there's a podcast. The documentary on it. So.
Yeah, there's a documentary too, but there's also a podcast. I watched the documentary. I'm listening to the podcast now too about it. And so anyway, corruption comes with gambling.
And college basketball in particular. If you think about why basketball, basketball is the easiest one to fix. You need one or two guys, and you can change the point spread. So you see here in 1951, we had CCYN, Manhattan, Long Island, several involved. Kentucky had its basketball program suspended. This was after the year they won the NCAA title. 1951, really, that's when the NCAA asserted more regulatory authority over these things to get rid of cheating and stuff like that. And this is the NCAA mission. The NCAA opposes all forms of legal and illegal sports wagering, which has potential to undermine the integrity of sports contests and jeopardize the welfare of student athletes and the intercollegiate athletics community. I will say this, 10 years ago, I mean, nobody was listening to me, so it doesn't matter, but I thought the NCAA should have dropped its opposition to betting on pro sports and just tried to preserve no betting on college sports. And I think had they done that, they might have been able to forge a compromise that would have stopped betting on college sports, which is the thing that concerns me the most today. But they didn't. They fought both. They still fight both up and down the line. And as a result, betting, they've lost completely, and betting is available on college and pro sports.
Well, now you have athletic departments like LSU brokering deals with, Caesars and organizations like
Your
that.
timing is a little bit off because
Okay.
I will get to them.
Sorry.
Better.
Spoiler.
This, so if you've seen Goodfellas,
Yes.
the Ray Liotta character, Henry Hill, authored this article in Sports Illustrated talking about how he paid off basketball players to shave points. And it's an amazing story. He says, look, you sit down with a college player, you put $10,000 in front of him, you say, I don't want you to lose. I just want you to win by less than 10 points, whatever the spread is. Just shave a few points off. Then, once they've taken that $10,000, you own them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
30 for 30 on this too.
there is a 30 for 30 on this too. So I don't have a slot in that. So thank you. All right. But this is the risk, right? This is the risk. Tulane, the NCAA, by the way, hasn't helped everything. I mean, Tulane ended its program in '85. It resumed it later, but a point shaving scandal. 1992, you have Bill Bradley, the senator from New Jersey, who had played in the NBA and in college, promoted PAPSA, the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, that basically stopped any state from adding sports betting if you didn't have it already. Those forced, Nevada had a full-on sports book. The other three states listed up there had some form tied to the lottery with a little bit of sports betting in it, but they didn't have full sports book. They could not expand beyond what they had, but they could keep their little game tied to the lottery. You're allowed to opt into this. New Jersey tried to get in within a year. You had a year to get sportsbook going, and New Jersey really tried to get in. They didn't get it done in time, and so they were barred from offering sportsbook by this law. Problems kept coming. 96, you see Boston College football players suspended for betting. It's 97. Arizona State players charged with conspiracy, sports bribery. These are criminal sanctions there. Northwestern in 98, football player pled guilty. More recently, 2011, Toledo men's basketball player, also 2011, two former University of San Diego basketball athletes indicted for conspiring to fix games. So it's gone on for a long time. And then we have this rise of FanDuel and DraftKings. And you can't really overestimate the importance of what happened with these companies. So going back to the Wire Act, Bobby Kennedy's Wire Act, we get into the 2010s, 2011, 12, 13, and we now have Powerball and lotteries that go across state lines, but they're not really using phone lines. So the issue becomes, does the Wire Act apply only to sports betting or any kind of gambling? And does it apply to things other than telephone numbers? Does it apply to communications by computer? And we get a regulatory interpretation that says, yes, it applies to all those things, but we're not going to apply it to fantasy sports. There was no such thing as daily fantasy sports at this time. There were only the thing, back in the 1980s, I was in a rotisserie league. They called it. It was 30 for 30 on that. And it was a baseball thing, but there was no daily sports fantasy, right? So it was a season-long thing, and basically the federal government's not going to get involved in trying to crack down on some neighborhood guys playing a baseball or football game. That's in essence what the regulation said. These guys behind these companies ran online poker games, and they immediately converted their game from poker or online casino to daily sports fantasy. They invented a new game to try to take advantage of this new interpretation of the Wire Act. I remember having a discussion with Ross Bjork, who was our faculty, who was our AD at the time, and Ross is saying, "Yeah, well, this daily sports fantasy stuff is legal." I said, "No, it's not, Ross. Gambling laws are almost all state laws. These were still illegal under state law. They simply said that we're not going to apply the Wire Act to this stuff, but these are clearly illegal." No. We had a little argument. In the meantime, these guys are operating and bringing in millions and millions. The regulators in the various states are trying to figure out, do we go after these or not? So they started asking for attorney general opinions. And I remember because Ross and I had a friendly argument going on. I remember when the New York attorney general came out and said, these are still illegal. And then after that, one after another, attorney generals kept saying they were illegal. But in the meantime, these guys have made so much money. They started going around the states and lobbying the states to change their state laws. I talked to the head of our legislative gambling committee. He said he'd never seen money thrown around the way these guys threw money around when they came down to lobby. They lobbied and they convinced the state of Mississippi to legalize this kind of stuff. So now we've got this going in so many states. There's still a few states where it's not legal, not many, but still a few states where it's not legal. But everybody's betting this kind of betting. Now it's a whole lot easier to take that next step. But before it can be taken, we've got this case. We've got the legislation, the PAPSA case is still out there, and it's being pursued. It was under the name of Chris Christie because he was the governor of New Jersey, and really, the way it worked, despite how the graphic looks, the plaintiffs were the leagues and the NCAA on the right side, suing the state. Sweet Home Alabama, I can forgive you. It's anyway. So he's been trying to get gambling sports going, and he's sued all the time. And the case goes up and down several times. Then finally, we got a new governor, so the case is decided as Murphy versus NCAA. But in 2018, the Supreme Court overturned PAPSA. It said it's unconstitutional, that the federal government had basically usurped state authority by controlling this. And so now states can have sports betting if they want it. Mississippi, and I think some other states, but I know Mississippi, when we allowed the daily sports fantasy, we also wrote the bill, and if it's ever possible to have regular sports betting, that's also going to be legal. So it was legal like that in Mississippi. Still needed regulations, but it was legal like that. The leagues were pretty funny. The leagues beforehand were, protect the integrity. Afterwards, we want to cut. They all asked for integrity fees, so it's called, including Ross Bjork. We got together and went down to the the Gaming Commission of Mississippi. They got the president, not the president, the athletic directors from Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Southern Mississippi, and Jackson State, the compliance officers from those 4 schools, and they invited me because I do gambling. And we tried to figure out how are we going to deal with having sports betting in Mississippi. And here's some advice that came out of that is important, I think, to think about. You need a good line of communication between the school and the Gaming Commission. We also requested and got a promise from, I mean, it's not really more than a promise, but a promise from the Gaming Commission. They would not authorize any prop bets based upon the individual performance of a collegiate athlete. So they will not take, there's not going to be whether an individual athlete makes a field goal, gets a hit next to the bat, whatever. So we're not going to have any of those kind of bets approved for college athletes. They can do it for pros, but not going to do that. We also, as you probably know, not only athletes, but also people who work around athletes all the way up to the president or chancellor and faculty athletic rep and athletic directors and anybody who works in athletics are prohibited by NCAA regulation betting on college sports. And as I was talking about earlier, it's if you play volleyball, you cannot bet on the NBA because basketball is regulated by the NCAA. So you can't bet on any level of any sport that is regulated by the NCAA. So it doesn't matter if it's your sport. It doesn't matter if it's professional. If the sport is regulated, if it's, I don't know, sumo wrestling or something that's not regulated by the NCAA, you can bet on it. But you can't bet on any level of any sport that's regulated by the NCAA. So now you're worried because suddenly your athletes and certainly the people who work around athletics can go in to sports books where these bets are being made. And how do you prove that they didn't make a bet if there's an accusation? So we actually got an agreement with the Gaming Commission to put all of our athletes and everybody who works in athletics on a ban list from entering the sports book. Now, going to casino, other parts of casino, but like I'm not supposed to go into the sports book. And in my gaming law class, I'm taking my classes up there and we get a tour, they get to the sports book area and I don't go, and I know I could really, but I remember the first time making that decision. I'm not supposed to go in there. I mean, it's stupid that in a way, but it also was my idea to put rule in. So I stay outside when we go through there. But that line of communication and doing those things, if they notice something unusual in the betting line shifts, something like that. Of course, a lot of the concern immediately was about gamblers getting information from players. Talk about that more in a moment. And how do we maintain confidentiality and should we require disclosure of injuries and all those kind of things. We can see already, this is from February, where sports betting is legal and live is the darker green. Lighter green, it's legal, but it's not operational. Florida was operational for a while and pulled back. It's illegal in the bright red and it's illegal, but there's possible legislation in kind of the pink. So you can see it's tremendous growth and you can see the projections in terms of finances. So this year they're predicted to be up to $5.3 billion, which is more than twice what it was just 2 years ago. Expected to double again within the next 5 years. So this is that kind of money gets attention and gets people interested. It also creates problems like this guy. This is the coach at Dayton who gave a pretty strong talk. This is maybe 2 months ago now, where he says his players are getting hateful calls and it's from gamblers, people who, if they don't beat the point spread or whatever. There's a combination with the collective situation where you start to feel like you're an owner a little bit. You've bought a little piece of a player. And then with the gambling kind of stuff, that there's a mindset. Lane Kiffin, the football coach at Ole Miss, talked about that's problematic, that more fans feel both entitled and feel embittered when when their players don't play or they don't play up to where they're supposed to play. So here was the initial response I talked about when we met with the gaming commission. That's the first part. The Southeastern Conference officially left everything to the schools. They don't like to get out in front of those kind of things. The NCAA focused on limiting information to gamblers, trying to make sure we're going to protect that. What do you, as faculty members, notice about these initial concerns?
Limited.
They're limited, and they're limited to what? What's the main thing we're looking at here?
Not involving the student athletes.
Well,
Certainly not involving student athletes' safety.
yeah, but it's actually about athletes. It's all about athletics. And the risk is greater than athletics here. I mean, I think that's the thing. We've hit a situation where sports betting is cool. We've got all these promotions. You can, we're living in a new kind of world. You watch games on TV, constant ads, where I am at least, for betting. The Mannings, do Caesar's Palace ads, and Mannings are royalty at Ole Miss. There are prop bets that people can make. Well, we don't have phone-based betting yet where we live, although there's legislation going through. I think this is going to be highly dangerous when college students have these. And you've got the operator on the other side. I tend to say casino, and last night my son-in-law corrected me. Well, it's not really a casino, but whoever the operator is on the other side, they're going to know what teams you like, what kind of bets you like, how you're doing that weekend. Hey, you're really on a roll. You want to try and parlay tonight? Hey, we see you're down. Here's a chance. We'll give you a nod. Tell you what, we'll cut you a deal on this next bet if you want to go double or nothing. Those kind of things are all available and right there. And you picture some of our college students on a Saturday afternoon sitting around drinking beers, doing that. I mean, it's really playing with fire. Art Schleister, you may remember him from Ohio State. This is a guy who became an absolute degenerate gambler. He was a potentially, great pro. He lost everything over it. But it's not just the athletes. It's every student, and more so than men and women. But, the DSM-5 recognizes gambling disorder as an addiction. A lot of people demonstrate problems with it. We don't have to go back that far, though. Dostoevsky, the gambler, wrote, even as I approach the gaming hall, as soon as I hear 2 rooms away, the jingle of money poured out on the table, I almost go into convulsions. People who are really gamblers say, and Nick the Greek said, the best thing in the world is to gamble and win. Second best thing is to gamble and lose. It's the thrill that they get from it. Who's betting? Well, men are twice likely as women too. We're the high-risk people, adolescents, emerging adults, young people, our students, men, disadvantaged racial groups, lower income levels, single people. See, by the age there, the highest concentration is 18 to 24. Of course, when it's legal, presumably we're going to talk about 21 to 24. But if your buddy is there who's 21, your fraternity brother's 21, and you're 18, and he can place a bet for you, I'm thinking that's going to be done quite a bit. A lot of people have other problems, alcohol, drug addiction, which often masks the problem. Gambling may be at the root of it, but you're taking drugs, you're drinking, you're doing other stuff, and that's what the counselors may notice first. And it may be tough to push through that. Between 2018, when PAPSA was overturned, and 2021, 30% increased risk for problem gambling nationwide, mainly with young male online gamblers. Much higher rates of substance use and abuse, high rate of depression, high rate of suicide. From the Executive Director, National Council on Problem Gambling. We already know that folks born after 1995 have high rates of anxiety, suicide, such. Never been a generation that's more depression, anxiety, fragility. This national study showed sports bettors have far more problematic indication than non-sports bettors. In other words, you played poker, you played blackjack, you play something else. It's more problematic if you're a sports bettor. Younger players are at higher risk. And a lot of folks who don't gamble don't understand that. So a lot of our counselors on campus may not understand some of the stuff they need to understand. And financial stuff is huge for everybody who gambles, but I think ought to be particularly problematic for students. This is from a helpline worker. Other states that have rushed to legalize sports betting since the Supreme Court struck down a federal ban in May 2018. Connecticut's in the middle of a giant spike in both the volume of calls and the number of callers who specifically mentioned sports gambling as part of their problem. Mental health connections between problem gamblers. 4 out of 10 of them have an anxiety disorder. Half of them have a mood disorder. 6 out of 10 have a personality disorder. Half of them commit violent crimes. 80% of them are at risk for drug or alcohol abuse. And most of them don't seek assistance. Even those who want assistance are reluctant to do so. We know that's true about mental issues and problem in general. We know that's true about drug and sex and alcohol and everything else. It's absolutely true of gambling. This is from Sweden. 53% of divorce statistics cite gambling addiction as a problem. I'm sorry, that's actually a little confusing. I think that's citing financial problems. So as compared to 18% for non-gamblers. But the bottom line there, a quarter to a half of spouses of compulsive gamblers end up getting abused. People get violent, people get angry. Many have different problems. We kind of talked about that already, I guess. And again, up to half consider suicide and 1 in 5 try suicide, attempt it. Not always successfully, but sometimes successfully. Ole Miss, we had a student shoot himself just this past week. I had no idea. Probably was not gambling, but you know, you don't want to encounter that for any reason. But what are college campuses doing? And this is where it really gets to us. New York Times, fairly recent study talked about Michigan State cutting a deal with Caesars Sportsbook. 7 other universities, including LSU, University of Colorado at Boulder, signed sports betting contracts. At least a dozen sports athletic departments and booster clubs have deals with casinos. This is the one from LSU. This was sent out, including to kids under 21, encouraging them to bet. There also are a deal so that when the athletic department emails their sponsors, their supporters, their ticket owners, it's going to encourage betting with Caesars.
They also advertise at the games.
Advertise at the games.
I like the little, go back, gambling problems, call this number.
Right,
The ads have that
Yeah.
right.
everywhere.
And here's Michigan State. Here is Colorado Boulder. There's a little good news about this. Talk about it. Up until all this happened in 2018, the NCAA prohibited any place that allowed betting on college sports, which basically meant Nevada, from hosting a Final Four or some kind of thing like that. Once everybody is allowing this, the NCAA dropped that ban, so we're now going to have Final Fours and similar things hosted in Las Vegas.
Is that the good news?
No, that's not.
The Sweet 16 and Elite 8 this year.
Yeah, that's right. This year they couldn't do it until
So they changed the rule. Although I did read, by the way, that, the athletics, the Oakland Athletics apparently have bought some property in Las Vegas, so they may be moving too. So that's not me at the model of the shadow on the right, but, smoking, you know, we're not going to embrace smoking. We're not going to embrace drinking. We're not going to embrace drugs, but we're embracing gambling. You know, I mean, it seems just silly. The good news is this. The faculty senate and the athletics committee at Colorado Boulder came out against that deal that they had cut with PointsBet. It's a gambling space, and Boulder has backed out of it. So they canceled that deal, led in part by the faculty senates. So that's who you guys represent. Be aware that that voice had some sway on that campus. The thing on the right is less important in a way, but the Premier League in soccer is now banning sports advertising from the front of the jersey. Still could be on the sleeves and elsewhere, but at least that's a step in that direction. Surprisingly, the American Gaming Association, an umbrella group of gambling operators, has come out recently saying sports wagering should not be promoted or advertised in college or university-owned news assets or advertised on college or university campuses. I think, and I've thought this, by the way, for a long time since I started studying gambling, that the people in gaming saw what happened to tobacco, and they're trying to stay away from, you know, getting hammered the way tobacco got hammered. So they came out actually with a quite good statement about policies for campuses. They shouldn't include any component that promotes, markets, advertise sports wagering activity, except alumni networks or context that is exclusively focused on responsible gaming education or problem gambling awareness. Sports books should not enter name, image, and likeness endorsements or partnerships with amateur athletes. There are educational things you can get involved with. So, you know, so you think I'm hot, no matter, no machine is overdue for a win. And that's exactly right. Every play has the same chance of winning. So, you know, we talk ourselves into silly things. Don't do that. It's important that people realize, and I mean, I should have let that slide out, I'm thinking. But it's important that people realize, our counselors and our other people, us as faculty members, realize that when someone's got a gambling addiction, they're not a bad person or not evil. They've got something that they're not really enjoying. They're suffering, and we need to recognize these kind of things. What can we do as faculty members? And by the way, it may not just be our students. You may have family members, you may have colleagues where you might see this. Early signs like tired, disheveled clothing, appearing more uncomfortable than usual, or the individual.
Wasn't that junior faculty?
I was going to say it's me. But you see worsening signs happening there. Be aware. So if you're going to talk to somebody, now, obviously we can't talk to everybody. There's some people, someone, if you think you can, be aware of these kind of things. I mean, Dan is a social worker. He probably tell you all these things. I'm actually taking an online course they've got for counseling at Ole Miss. Without blaming them, you know, explain how it might be impacting others. Focus on fixing. Focus on the positives. Get them to talk about, you know, what might be good. And you can. I won't have to read everything here. I hate when people just read PowerPoint. You try not to blame or lecture. Try to help them come to a solution together. This is us looking at somebody else.
Yeah.
The hardest thing is for them to look at themselves. I mean, this is, I never thought I'd put up a slide by Mary Kate Olsen, but I did. Here's a sign that they may have that only yourself you're going to know about. But these kind of things, are you preoccupied, restless, or irritable, hiding or lying, borrowing to gamble, chasing losses, spending more time gambling? These are things for the person to recognize. There's a task force on college gambling. By the way, I printed out 14 copies of paper. I put, I don't know where the hell to publish it. This is now a Law Journal article. But if you want to pick up, if there are links and stuff there, and if you prefer, if you send me an email, I'll send you a copy that has operable links on these kind of things. But there are these policies that were established by a Harvard Medical School affiliate that talks about different things you can do to accommodate students and help them get better. I mean, it's a lot of self-empowerment, it's education, it's providing counseling. One of the interesting things that we found out at the University of Kentucky, where we normally think counseling face-to-face and personal relationships are preferable. There's a recent survey at the University of Kentucky that shows an awful lot of their athletes are liking Zoom or even anonymous phone call counseling sessions. So I'm thinking that there's really room for gambling sessions like this. There's a certain amount of anonymity to it, remoteness that may help people talk, and it's much less expensive probably than hiring somebody in. So I mean, I'm thinking that there's room there for some sort of expansion along those lines. So if there's more information, there are pretty much, you go online and you can find a lot of places that have stuff. The National Council on Problem Gambling has a lot of links within that link. That's what I got.
Yes.
Any questions or anything, or?
You said a lot. And it was good.
Thank you.
I think the thing that concerned me, I have I've been around drugs a lot of drug addicts, been around a lot of people that gamble. It sort of seemed like it's very similar. And a lot of people don't want help. My big concern is that we know that the adult brain for males don't fully develop until 25, 28, right? So, and then when I'm looking at, you had a slide that 73% have alcohol disorders. I think people pick up alcohol habits when they're in college. It's the one drug that I tell people that is socially acceptable, and we know it damages the prefrontal cortex, or it definitely lowers the decision making. And then when you have the phones at their hand with their disposals, and then you also have e-gaming.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot of betting on e-gaming, so things of that nature, which is sort of enhancing that desire to want to gamble. It's scary because I know we should do something, but I don't really know if having, all of these measures in place will really help. And I feel like what we're doing in college, just the environment, a lot of times is sort of creating a lot of these behaviors that when they become adults, they sort of develop this. And that's kind of my concern.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I think those good points. I'm focused on point number one up there here. Establish a campus-wide committee to develop and monitor comprehensive comprehensive policy on gambling. I mean, get people together and talk about that and figure out, and it may be different one campus to another too. Yeah. But like when I started at the beginning, as I understand, I've read the statistic all over, and I haven't seen it change. You would think that it would be creeping up, but everywhere I see 22% of campuses is all that have anything on gambling. You can fold a lot of that into training we already do. But I don't think that they have, and I'm sure we don't have a comprehensive thing like this.
Well, but a lot of campuses are now, trying to place more emphasis on mental health.
Yes.
So this could just be folded into that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that was true.
Completely.
Yeah. And that slide, for me, I think one of the most compelling ones is the prevalence of mental health crises, issues that we have on college campuses. And everyone I've spoken to, colleagues all around the United States at UConn and other places, have discussed how so many of their students, the pandemic has affected them in different ways. Like academic rigor has declined. They're sort of like, they're showing up, but also their anxiety rates, the depression. We have a Center for Students with Disability, and we had to increase funding and staff because we have so many more demands. But this seems logical. It just seems like a logical place for those sorts of concerns. And given how important it is, and this seems to be recognized by everyone in higher education, it seems like this would be a natural fit for what we already do, just kind of augmenting what we have.
So too.
If they want help.
If they want.
If they want help.
If they want out, part of the self-recognition.
26% of 18 to 24-year-olds gamble or have a gambling problem.
No, the have a problem is 6%.
Okay,
Okay.
but a quarter of our students are gambling.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, that would be like really regular gambling. I mean, gamble at all, you're getting up around 75% that have, occasional bet or something.
Okay, so 26% are gambling regularly. 6% of our students have a gambling problem.
And
Which is like twice the national average for adults.
is adult average.
2 to 3 would be the adult average.
So our students
6%.
are at most risk.
Yes.
Our age group. Jerry, did you
And
have
it
a
makes
question?
sense. No family, they really.
You're on your own.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only thing that I was gonna add was you had mentioned those of us that work in or around athletics, we're not allowed to gamble. But the only thing I was going to extend is that includes students that work in and around athletics.
Yeah.
So our athletic training students, folks that are managers on the team, student dietitian, all of them would be part of that all-encompassing group.
Yes. And I'll bet if you talk to your athletic department, they're all concerned about keeping things private and making sure,
100%.
and nobody's thinking about this part.
That's right.
Yeah, let me
Yeah, they
talk
are.
about that first.
Are they? Well,
Yeah,
good.
they are.
Well, yours are.
Mine are, yeah, right within our athletic training policy and procedures, we specifically talk about why we do not gamble, we cannot gamble, we have private medical information that can impact outcomes, not to talk about it with your friend, even though you don't know that your friend gambles, but your information could help.
Well, they have that, but that always actually, that stems from protecting the bet as well, protecting the game sort of. The NCAA has always had that rule. But what I'm talking about is just protecting students from developing serious problems.
I see, sure. Yeah, when I was younger and in college, one of my roommates for a while was a bookie. And at least at that time, I doubt it's changed among the fraternity system. That was just part of the culture. And what concerns me particularly about the apps is, my roommate didn't call people and say, hey, you want to do a parlay on this. He never called anybody and asked. They called him.
Right.
So my concern about the apps is, making that suggestion and just,
Yeah.
Especially as artificial intelligence continues.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't keeping statistics and stuff. He just, took the bets. But most of his clients were young guys in fraternities with disposable income. And it was part of the culture as much as drinking was.
I had a friend in law school who was not a bookie, but he was a serious gambler. And I remember one Monday, he said, I got killed yesterday. He said, I got to win tonight on Monday Night Football or I'm going to disappear.
Yep.
And he didn't mean like the gangsters get him. He said he was just going to leave somewhere because he couldn't stay in town if he lost again. But unfortunately, he won. And yeah,
But he's still around.
I always say he was a great guy to hang out with. If he won, he bought drinks. And if he lost, he just went away. Didn't have to pay him back.
One of the problems, somebody alluded to it, at LSU, they have the Tiger Athletic Foundation, they have the athletic department, and the athletic department now has this, I couldn't find the name of it. They have this organization that's part of the department, but not part of the department. So when they do deals with companies and things like the Caesars deal, it doesn't have to be public. It's private. But the confusion I have is the person that they hire to operate that organization gets approved by the Board of Supervisors. So I don't understand why the contracts don't go through the Board of Supervisors for approval for that kind of thing. And that's something that I think we could push as faculty senates, that any contracts with athletic departments should go through the Board of Supervisors, just like any other university contract. That way, we would know whether they were doing this Caesars sports thing before it happened. It's like came out of the blue all of a sudden when everybody's getting all these emails about sports betting.